Hello, internet friends, and welcome to the Legion testing second pass for the Blood Death Knight. And since December, when I first looked at Blood Death Knight, oh my goodness, it has come a long way. It is like another new spec right off the gate. As of course, before we get into this, I cannot always show everything in this video. If you want to see like 7 hours of testing and figuring things out and theory crafting and number crunching and percentage testing and all sorts of stuff, please check out the video link to the VOD in the description box, as well as the bug report. It's well over a page long of things that aren't working, or stuff that doesn't work properly, or values that are incorrect, or a very interesting talent that doesn't do anything like it says, which we'll go over here, of course, in this video. We're going to go over the basic toolkit here and the spell book. Then we'll go over the artifact perks. And then we'll go over your talents and show off a whole bunch of spell effects along the way. But right out of the gate for the Blood Death Knight, you have a sort of dichotomy of choices to make between your active mitigation changes. So, your Veteran of the Third War passive is just increased stamina and increased armor. You're going to notice for the Blood Death Knight that there are a lot of stamina or max HP bonuses. A lot. Which, you're looking at my HP now, it's not even that high. And from my knowledge, like, tanks that aren't Guardian Druids, even in, like, Mythic Raid testing right now, you're not actually gaining that much HP. Like, yeah, tanks have a lot of HP in Legion, right? They have like 4 to 5 million. Bear Druids have over 10 million. But it helps really kind of weave through how bosses will no longer global you. Because you can have to take multiple hits before you can get low. And healers have a long time to react in a way to smooth out tank damage. And, of course, tanks' jobs are to smooth incoming damage. And how you do that as a Blood Death Knight, which is still very much here, is your Blood Shield Mastery, which is each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, you gain 30% at my current mastery of the base amount healed as a physical damage absorption shield, which of course stacks. And all masteries for tanks in Legion give you attack power. So Death Strike, which is your active mitigation as it's flagged in your combat log here, is a runic power spender. So it deals physical damage, heals you for 30% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds, with a minimum amount of 7% of your maximum HP. Now, from my knowledge and from the testing we did, if the 7% HP is higher, or the damage you've taken with the 30% in the last 5 seconds is higher, that value is used to heal yourself. Not either or, it's like a random chance. It's whatever is the higher value. Normally if you're taking heroic or mythic bosses or challenge dungeons or whatever, it'll be the 30% in the last 5 seconds. Otherwise, it'll be the maximum of your health minimum heal. But that's Death Strike. And why I said to begin with that there is this back and forth of what you want to be paying attention to is the new ability called Marrow Rend, which is what gives you Bone Shield. So 2 runes, it's physical damage less than Death Strike, and generates 3 charges of Bone Shield, where you surround yourself with a barrier of whirling bones, reducing all damage you take from one source by 20%, and while you have Bone Shield active, you gain 10% haste. It doesn't stack. The tooltip for it right now is incredibly broken, where it like stacks multiple times, and it keeps saying your damage taken is reduced by a lot more than it's supposed to be, and that your blank is increased by 90%. It's not how it works. It's Marrow Rend's Bone Shield charges. As Bone Shield works, it's a ability, an attack, a spell, a dot, a cleave attack. One source of damage will be reduced by 20%, and while you at least have 1 charge of Bone Shield, you do gain 10% additional haste. As I open up this new character sheet here, it's not done, okay? It's not finished. It's not completed yet. Don't worry about it. There'll be an advanced view, and of course there'll be an add-on that'll come out in Legion that'll just fix the whole thing. it looks nice and clean, but there's lots of things that it's not telling you right now that are problematic for testing. Like, what's my parry chance? I know I have 5% dodge chance, but what's my attack power, right? There are some things on this that don't say what they do, and it's really awkward that it doesn't say everything. But again, it's being iterated upon. It's a good step in the right direction, but it's not finished yet. But Marrow Rend, you need to keep your Bone Shield stacks up, because that's how you mitigate incoming damage. You get to pay attention to, obviously, using Death Strike to keep up your shield, or to counteract damage being dealt. But because Marrow Rend also... I was told there's this weird thing right now with Blood DKs where you're like, waiting around for, like, the boss to hit you, so you can actually use abilities because you have a lot of stacks of Bone Shield. So there's a weird interplay with that right now that, like, it's not too hard to keep up Marrow Rend and keep up your Bone Shield charges, and you don't really have other buttons to hit. The downtime is, like, gone, basically, though. There used to be a lot of downtime on Blood before, but it's not there anymore. Not at all. But that's your other Marrow. Marrow Rend's your other active mitigation, along with Death Strike. Additionally, you have Death and Decay, which you see here. The benefit to Death and Decay is the same as, like, the Unholy Death Knight with Death and Decay and Scourge Strike. Whereas if you're standing in your D&D and you hit Heart Strike, in this case, you will AoE additional targets nearby. Well, it's kind of buggy. Let me see if I can get it right to work. There we go. So, by default, Heart Strike is one enemy target, physical damage, and one nearby target. Also has a built-in snare. And that's his Heart Strike. Blood Strike was here originally, it's now gone. It does generate the 5 bonus runic power by default, though. So 1 rune, which is normally 10 runic power, with this is 15, with 1 use of Heart Strike. And the other thing you can worry about is you saw me cast Blood Boil there. The Blood Boil no longer costs anything. It is just a recharge system reduced by your haste. So it gives you a little bit of haste synergy. Beyond that, all you get is auto attacks and rune recovery rate. Which, on the topic of auto attacks, you have Crimson Scourge, which your auto attacks on targets infected by your Blood Plague, which Blood Boil does spread Blood Plague. Not right now. I have a talent that's preventing that, but I'll show you like that in a moment. Have the chance to reset Death and Decay and make it cost no runes. But D&D only has a 15-second cooldown for Blood. But unlike Frost and Unholy, which have Runic Corruption or Runic Empowerment, having a passive ability to, like, regenerate runes or speed up rune recovery rate, Blood doesn't have that baseline. They have other rune tools, but Crimson Scourge, I guess, is your rune tool. That it gives you chances to just get free D&Ds, which won't generate runic power, but it just gives you a free D&D that doesn't cost a rune to take away from. You can use a Heart Strike or a rune towards Marrow Rend. And that's fine, but for the moment I've seen so far, other than spreading your Blood Plague through Blood Boil, which I have a talent right now that's taking that away. I'll just turn that off for a moment. So you can see it actually does spread your Blood Plague. That it's kind of like a filler. And it is to help you smooth your rotation by rotating it through. It does good damage as well. Your other abilities all do physical damage, whereas your Blood Boil does shadow damage, so it ignores armor, as it were. And the one thing to talk about with Blood Plague, as you can see it right now, is that it's a shadow disease that drains health over 24 seconds. Of course, it does pandemic up to 30, or 31, I guess, with the 0 counter. But it heals you. Blood Plague is a passive trickle heal. Per target, Blood Plague will heal you 4. Now, that just scales with your versatility as a heal, and then, of course, your attack power via your mastery or your strength and whatnot to have a stronger version of the Blood Plague ticking. But it's a new thing with Blood, and you'll see as we go through here that there's lots of just additional healing resources. When I went over Vengeance Demon Hunter, I was talking about how it has a lot of, like, extra built-in healing, or even Guardian Druid does, or even a little bit from Prot Pally. But Blood Death Knight is the king of self-heal. There is a ton of self-healing. From Blood Plague and Death Strike and other sources and your artifact and talents, tons of sustained self-healing. But that is the core of your rotational abilities. Your other new one, however, is Death's Caress. 1 rune cost. It is a ranged ability to apply Blood Plague and deal some additional shadow damage. There are like 1-ish talents that really work together with Death's Caress, but for the most part, it is just ranged utility. You do, of course, still have Gorfine's Grasp and or Death Grip. You do have Gorfine's Grasp as well. Only Blood DKs have Gorfine's Grasp. It's a 3-minute cooldown. And you still have Death Grip, of course, as I showed. Death Grip is still a taunt, as well as Dark Command. Additional things you can see here in the spellbook, you still have Anti-Magic Shell. Asphyxiate now is baseline and is a 45-second cooldown that no longer needs to be channeled for the 5-second stun. Control Undead, Dancing Rune Weapon. It lasts longer because of an artifact perk right now, and there's a quite a number of bugs with DRW, right? That like not working with Heart Strike. It doesn't even do anything with it. It still blood boils and whatnot, so you can still blood boil with it. It does duplicate its own disease. It'll copy your Death's Caress. It'll copy your Marrow Rends. It'll copy your Death Strikes. It does not heal you, ever, but it doesn't Heart Strike at all right now. So, and it also doesn't, for later use, it doesn't Bone Storm. So it's supposed to probably copy all of your attacks, but they haven't hooked the new attacks up to it yet. Deathgate, again, once you do the Legion quest, Deathgate will take you to the new Acarus. Otherwise, it'll take you to the one in Wrath of the Lich King up by Lightsup Chapel. Mind Freeze was changed in this last build. It's a 15-yard interrupt now. It was melee range, but your interrupt now is a 15-yard interrupt. You have Path of Frost, you have your combat res, Rune Forging is here. And when I bring this up real quick, we didn't really come to a conclusion because there was a lot of back and forth about the new Stone Skin Gargoyle being 4% armor and 3% all stats. That means base stats, so stamina, strength, etc., not your secondaries. As far as we know, I didn't go enchant it because going back and forth and where the Rune Forging is, and I don't want to have the extra stats, dealing with my, and gumming up the works for testing. But Stone Skin Gargoyle might be good for early on, like early progression, and then Fallen Crusader might be better for later on. But 25% strength on a proc on a 1.5 ppm that could proc back and forth and waste uptime of the rune versus passive armor and passive strength and stamina, because there's a lot of stamina gains and HP gains on the Blood DK. Stone Skin Gargoyle might be good, but many will probably just take Fallen Crusader. But who knows? We'll have to see. Wraithwalk is your utility movement that also suppresses all movement impairing effects while you are Wraith walking. As I bring that up, we're going to jump over to the utilitier to get this out of the way early for the Blood DK. All DK specs have a talent that interacts with Wraithwalk. The Blood one is that it lasts 50% longer, so it will last for 6 seconds at 70% movement speed. And when you actually activate it, it will break all stun, snare, and root effects. Whereas by default, it will just suppress movement impairing effects, which is a pretty powerful one for Blood anyway. The Unholy one was a faster and shorter cooldown, and Frost had a DR built in. But your other utilitier abilities are Tremble Before Me, which you might have seen on the target dummies when I cast Death and Decay. You can actually go back to the old school D&D that has the Cower in Fear for 3 seconds on non-boss mobs with a 10-second ICD. So you have your RNG CC on Death and Decay again. And then Tightening Grasp is a reduction by 1 minute on Gorfiends. And then it also gives your D&D the 70% movement snare, which is a bit of a contentious point, I've been told, because the kiting potential on the Blood Death Knight, because you do not have the slows anymore, like you don't have Chill Blains at all, and you don't have any type of other snare in the kit, is your only other way to actually kite things and slow them down, which is a problem that I've been told, but we'll see how it works out in the end. Your other cooldowns, Vampiric Blood is being buffed by your artifact. I'll take off my artifact real quick so you can see the actual baseline here. So Vampiric Blood is a 30% max HP jump and 30% all healing received. Artifact perks we'll go into shortly. It's 45% max HP and 60% healing received, a 90-second cooldown. You don't have IBF anymore, that is gone. Your only other major cooldown was Dancing Rune Weapon, which is 40% parry while active. Parry is granted by critical strike rating, and going over stats when we were testing, it looks like crit mastery, super strong for the Blood DK in Legion, with haste being kind of like, and versatility because it double dips with a lot of your damage or things that heal you and back and forth. Versatility is also very strong for the Blood Death Knight. But haste is sort of just, they're all fine because rune regeneration, auto attacks for Crimson Scourge, for, runes for death and decay. Critical Strike has lots of synergies, which we'll see as we go through here. Mastery is obviously very good for your heal shield and your attack power for everything else. And then versatility double dips with a lot of things on the Blood DK. So we'll see how that works out, of course, in Legion when things get tuned. But that is the base kit. Nothing else is there. Some things have definitely been moved around and been removed from the Blood Death Knight. But for the most part, that is everything you're looking at here. So let's jump over here to the Maw of the Damned, which grants you the Consumption ability. Consumption has gone through a lot of iterations, as with all the other Death Knight artifact powers. Right now, it is still sort of a super awesome Death Strike without the damage snapshotting. Like the 30% window that's just happened in the last 5 seconds. But Consumption's a 45-second cooldown where you do a incredibly strong frontal cleave physical damage attack that heals you for 200% of that damage. That means that if you hit one mob, it'll heal you for that damage. Or if you hit 3 mobs like this, which you don't have to have a target for Consumption, it's just a frontal attack, you will heal for 200% of all the damage done, and of course critical strikes are affected by this, but it hits everything in front of you. It's like a 120-degree-ish 8-yard frontal cleave, which you don't need to have a target for. It's very powerful, obviously in tandem with Vampiric Blood, because you will increase the healing received by it, and it already is 200% of the damage done. But that also gives scaling, of course, to your attack power, giving you more physical damage, and of course, your relic slots on your artifact, giving you more eye level. It buffs Consumption. It's not only physical damage component, but the heal you receive. It's kind of also like an oh crap button, without Death Pact anymore, which was removed. This is your only version of that, I suppose. Which, if I recall, Death Pact was a 2-minute cooldown anyway. This is a 45-second cooldown. It's an offensive version of that also benefits from proper use of cleaving or AoEing down things or coupling it with Vampiric Blood. But that is your artifact unlock, Consumption. We'll go through all these kind of passive things here real quick. You have 8% more physical damage done. Woo! Okay. Obviously, that scales with certain things, but it's kind of boring. Dance of Darkness is 6% more duration on your Dancing Rune Weapon. You have Iron Heart, 10% more armor. You have Mouth of Hell. Dancing Rune Weapon summons a second copy of Maw of the Damned. Not doing that right now. So you're supposed to get 2 copies of your Maw of the Damned, so I would assume you can get more Blood Plagues up, and you can obviously do more damage with another rune weapon is there. And it's not going to amplify your parry any more than it does, but it'll be more like adding an extra bit of damage to your DRW with Mouth of Hell. Bone Breaker is 15% more damage on Marrow Rend. All-Consuming Rot is 30% more damage on your Death and Decay. Cholangiopathy. Coagulopathy? Let's blood stuff. I couldn't pronounce this when I was testing. I can't pronounce it now. It's 30% more damage on your Blood Plague. Rattling Bones is Marrow Rend with a 30% chance to generate an additional charge of Bone Shield. So it can give you 4 charges on 1 use besides 3. Grim Perseverance is 3% parry chance. That's fine. Vampiric Fangs is you increase the hit points gained by Vampiric Blood by an additional 15%, and the healing received by an additional 30. That's where you see the bonus on Vampiric Blood from earlier. Vein Render. Ven increases the damage of a heart strike by 30%. Just more damage on the heart strike. Blood Feast, though, is heart strike heals you for 25% of the damage it deals. You did not see this any earlier because it doesn't actually work. There's no healing from heart strike at all right now. Double check my notes. Yeah, there's no healing from heart strike. The cleave of it during Death and Decay or the actual hit of it there's no healing. So it's like a weaker version of Death Strike, but it's just a ton more random extra healing because you're going to be using lots of heart strikes anyway. But as it have, like, Death Strike can't cleave or AoE, but heart strike can. So in a AoE situation, prioritizing heart strikes over Death Strike to counteract incoming damage might be, like, incredibly powerful. But we'll see how that works out in the end, of course. Meat Shield is just 10% increased stamina. I didn't actually realize this, but every artifact trait you purchase gives you 1% increased stamina. Every single artifact has this now. So that's a slight just HP scaling on everyone, but as a tank, it's a little more imperative because you're going to gain more HP overall. And because you're gaining stamina from here, stamina from possibly Stoneskin Gargoyle, stamina from Maw of the Damned unlocked, and then your Paragon ability, which we can't really test at all. We don't know how it's going to work out in the end game. When you dump more artifact power into this slot is more total health. It's crazy. Skeletal Shattering is that each time Bone Shield absorbs damage, it has a chance equal to your critical strike chance to absorb an additional 15% of the damage. So this is a huge crit synergy. It's basically critical block. The only thing that we compared critical block to, though, is that critical block on the Prot Warrior is only physical damage. Bone Shield works on all damage. So you could reduce dot damage, AoE stuff, spell attacks by 35% with one charge of Bone Shield. Which, if played right, you'll have Bone Shield up forever. There's no way it would ever fall off. You would keep it up all the time. So Skeletal Shattering is a huge crit bonus. You have Umbilicus Eternus and the Hemo Shield. After Vampiric Blood expires, your absorbed damage equal to 5 times the damage your Blood Plague dealt during Vampiric Blood. Alright, so what's that mean? So, if you have Vampiric Blood up and you hit Vampiric Blood, or you have Blood Plague up and you hit Vampiric Blood, you get this Umbilicus Eternus, which you can cancel to automatically trigger the Blood Shield called Hemo Shield, or when it goes away, you get the shield right here. There's currently no value that it's actually recording, but what this does is that the maximum number of Blood Plague ticks that can happen during your Vampiric Blood is 4. If you time using Vampiric Blood on the 1 second tick or right before, you can have a tick of Blood Plague at 1, 4, 7, and 10 seconds of your Vampiric Blood duration. That'll give you 4 ticks of Vampiric Blood, or towards Vampiric Blood's shield from Blood Plague, towards Umbilicus Eternus, that is then multiplied by 5 to give you the shield after this falls off. Now, of course, that's more... The more Blood Plagues you have out on AoE targets or multiple mobs, the larger the Hemo Shield will be. But it is just another shield or another form of DR you can utilize after you heal yourself for a bunch using Vampiric Blood. Then you'll gain an extra shield to buffer the leaving of the cooldown. Because there's no Icebound Fortitude anymore. There's no raw damage reduction cooldown on the Blood Death Knight. So you have a lot of self-healing and this shield, for example, and of course how the Bone Shield interaction works is your only like flat damage reduction. So your other one over here is called Unending Thirst, which is while Blood Shield is active, which is from your mastery from Death Strike, you gain 25% leech. The weird problem with Unending Thirst is that because the shield applies first, this does mean that every Death Strike will always heal you for 25% of its damage done. You see in the combat log here, Blood Shield is applied, then Death Strike will heal, and because the shield is up before the damage is dealt, the hit right here, you'll always leech 25%. So you've got Heart Strike healing you, you've got Death Strike healing you and leeching, and if you can keep up the Death Strike shield, you could couple that with, of course, the Hemo Shield from Vampiric Blood, and Blood Plague heals you. You have so much healing and absorb built into the Blood Death Knight now. It's a little wild. It is actually a little bit ridiculous. Because there's so much self-sustain, there was some talk during testing that it's very rare to ever be spiked down as a blood DK, and you are super smooth to heal. But it also gives you this weird problematic issue that, again, like, if the bosses aren't hitting you fast enough, you can't usually use Marrow Rend. And the next big thing we talked about was that, okay, well, blood DKs are going to be able to really min-max their damage early. They're going to care about DPSing so much earlier because they're so self-sustaining, which is great. But think about living first before you worry about your DPS. And there's no Breath of Sindragosa nonsense anymore. There is something Breath of Sindragosa E, which we'll get into in a moment. But there's not the same, like, Breath Knight nonsense anymore to min-max your DPS as blood. But you do have a ton of self-healing coming in as the blood DK. Which we'll get into more of that right now. So, Blood Worms, as you've been seeing them popping off a couple of times here, are back, which is your auto attack critical strikes, more crit synergies, have a chance to summon a Blood Worm. Blood to your target for 15 seconds, and then burst, healing you for 20% of your missing HP at the time of their demise, or if you drop below 50% HP, they'll automatically burst and heal you. There's one right there. They don't have a range. You can move really far away from them. They'll attack the target they summon on, but I haven't noticed of them having an issue with healing me wherever I am, and the blood explosion just hits me and goes, blah, which will do any second now. Blah, there it is. Obviously, there's no healing for it right now. The pet damaged Bloodworm killed. It's all overheal, and I'm not missing any HP, so it doesn't heal me for anything because I have to be missing HP for it to work. But it's passive RNG. There's no more scaling off of your death strikes with a chance to summon them. It's just auto attack critical strike RNG. But if you're stacking crit anyway, you might have a ton of Bloodworms. Heartbreaker is a passive that your Heart Strike generates 2 additional runic power per target hit. So yes, that means if you hit multiple targets here, you will generate even more runic power. You see it right there. Heartbreaker in the combat log, 222 plus the 15 from it. So just a passive way to generate more runic power. It's just a set it and forget it, just as Bloodworms is set it and forget it as well. Not a whole lot of min-maxing to do with either of these, just more runic power or more healing. But more runic power also means more healing in the same way because you get more death strikes. Your other choice here is called Exsanguinate, which is very good, but also very kind of boring. So a 30-yard range, 30-second cooldown, 1 rune channeled. You can move while doing this. You can also parry, dodge, and move. But it's just a channeled heal. It is a... Because of how Blood Plague works, where it steals life, it drains life from the target, Exsanguinate works the same way. So it says drains health, that means it does damage. So it does damage and heals you for the same damage it deals. It's purely like attack power based, with of course your mastery affecting that with the attack power, and of course versatility coming in a not completely double dipped fashion. It's hard to test exactly, because versatility will make it do more damage, which will then heal you for more, but it doesn't scale adversely with either or of them. But versatility we've already went over earlier is a great stat for Blood DK. But like Heartbreaker is a passive for more runic power, and Bloodworms is a passive for like random healing. Whereas Exsanguinate is 1 rune, so it generates 10 runic power when used on a 30-second cooldown. We harken this, of course, to a weaker version of Death Pact again. But if it gets tuned properly to heal you for more than... Right now, it doesn't heal you for anything. 140,000? I have 2.1 million HP. It's not a lot. It does have the benefit of being ranged. So if you have to run away from the target, you have a ranged heal, because you can't do anything else at range, really. You can Death's Caress and put up Blood Plague. But it needs to heal for a little bit more to be worth it, I think. Your next tier, Spectral Deflection. We'll start with that one too, because this one might be a set it and forget because it's way too powerful. And we tested the crap out of this thing. So your attacks that deal more than 25% of your maximum health will consume a second Bone Shield charge to further reduce the damage. So what that means is that if an attack would hit you for a quarter of your health or more, we'll grab an additional charge of Bone Shield. It'll eat 2 of them. So by default, that is 40% DR on that attack alone. And yes, Skeletal Shattering from your artifact does work on either one or both, based on your crit. So you can have a 40% reduced damage attack, a 55, or a up to 70% reduced damage attack. And because you're going to have Bone Shield up all the time, it also helps large attacks eat more Bone Shield charges, so you actually get to use Marrow Rend more often. Because if a boss only auto-attacks you here and there, and you gotta factor in you could parry and dodge, which don't eat a Bone Shield charge, then you have that issue of, well, hit me so I can Marrow Rend, right? Hit me! So this helps because if they do hit you for a lot, it'll eat 2 charges. And it also reduces the crap out of that damage attack. Could be very good for progression or just forever. It does suffer a diminishing return from the more gear you have, the less chances you are to utilize SD very well, but we'll see how that works. I'm going to jump over here to Rapid Decomposition real quick, which is your D&D deals damage 50% faster, and while you're in your Death and Decay, you generate 20% more runic power. So from abilities being used, you'll generate more runic power. Heartbreaker works well with this too, because you'll get even more runic power as well. But because you're going to have D&D down all the time, if you want to gain a ton of runic power, 18 per Heart Strike, for example, it gives you more Death Strikes because you're gaining more runic power. And that's just, it's also more damage because your D&D ticks faster, and you get free D&Ds from your auto attacks. Rapid Decomposition is fun, but it's also a lot less direct damage reduction because it's not helping your Bone Shield charges or giving you this super Bone Shield, super crit Bone Shield blocks, right? And the other talent here, which is not exactly fantastic, to much chagrin during chat testing when we looked at Soul Gorge, where you consume Blood Plagues within 30 yards, dealing extra shadow damage to each infected enemy, and empowering you for 24 seconds with up to 15% rune regeneration per plague, and plagues closer to expiration grant more rune regeneration. And the passive, while you saw I couldn't apply Blood Boil earlier, no longer applies Blood Plague. You have to use Death's Caress to apply Blood Plague. It is an actual ability you can drag onto your bar. It is kind of like old Pulverize-ish for Guardian Druid, where you would eat your Lacerates and then gain DR based on the stacks eaten, but they get to reapply Lacerate, right? So Blood Plague's about to fall off here. Yank that in. We got 41 stacks. So we have 41%. It's 1% rune regeneration rate per stack, but you get a lot of rune regeneration rate, so they are going to reapply a lot faster. So you get a faster rotation, you get to slam down all these rune generation abilities, you get more runes being used, so you have more runic power being generated for more Death Strikes. But the caveat is you got to keep reapplying Blood Plague with Death's Caress. Now, the 3 runes you do use to do that on these 3 targets here is not a big deal because you gain so much rune power back. But through testing, we were figuring out that it's probably never going to be used on more than like a 1 to 3 target fight, like a council fight, if you choose to use this, because it's just so micromanagey, and on a single target, 15% rune regen is not like amazing, But on like a 2 or 3 target fight, getting 40%, it's like, oh, okay. But again, you gotta keep micromanaging out your Blood Plague through Death's Caress, which is just, it feels kind of gross, and you'll never use this on a fight where you want to AoE, because you want to make sure your Blood Boil applies the Blood Plague around itself in an AoE form. So we'll see how that works out. It's not a, I don't like that playstyle myself. I would take Rapid Decomposition or Spectral Deflection if I was a Blood Death Knight. These to me both make sense, either a somewhat active additional way to improve your DR or a passive way. Even though it's semi-active with SD because you have to make sure your Marrow Rends are up there. Moving on, we have Anti-Magic Barrier, which is basically super Anti-Magic Shell. You get a 25% max health bonus on the last stand during the 10 seconds of this buff. But remember, Anti-Magic Shell only lasts for 5 seconds. So the HP bonus of A and B is actually longer, and we'll go deeper in here. There are a lot of max HP nonsensical things. Obviously, your blood worms will increase their healing amount if you have this up during when they pop, because you have more HP in that 50% window. But more on that later. It's just that, you know, an extra bonus to your oh crap spell damage button. Blood Tap is back with a vengeance, sort of. It's instant cast, gives you a rune, as it always has before. 1 minute recharge, but the recharge time is reduced by 1 second whenever a Bone Shield charge is consumed. So as you are eating your Bone Shield charges by being damaged by a mob, it will go down a little faster. So you'll see down here, whenever the mob hits me, it'll go down immediately by an extra 1 second, which is fine. It's on-demand runes, but it's kind of weak in comparison. It's in a very weird spot where you get like this super big anti-magic shell HP bonus, or you just get like some extra runes over the course of an encounter, but not that often. So it's okay if you like Blood Tap, if you want that on-demand control, but it's also not as impactful as some might think, you know, the older version of it was. Run away real quick to reset my combat as the... So you saw the carrion worm, my blood worm right there, blew up on me all the way far away. So there's really no range, it seems. It's kind of weird. Ossuary has changed quite a bit. It's when you have at least 5 Bone Shield charges active, the cost of Death Strike is reduced by 5 runic power, which is kind of like a quality of life thing. But you also get 10 additional maximum runic power. This does mean you can pool and store 3 Death Strikes instead of only 2. Which is potent, right? Could be powerful. In this certain situation, it could be really good. But that's all it does by itself. So you have, like, extra Death Strike pooling in Ossuary. You have a huge HP bonus here, or you have Blood Tap. They all work around your resources in a way. Same thing as the tier above it does as well. But Blood Tap seems like the weakest one here, which is sad because Blood Tap is super powerful in the incarnations on live and in past expansions, but it could change. I'm gonna go Red Thirst here real quick first. Spending runic power will decrease the remaining cooldown on vampiric blood by 2 seconds per 10 runic power you spend. Super huge passive, to couple with the fact of how amazing Umbilicus Eternus can be, and the Hemo Shield. The more vampiric bloods you get to use during an encounter, the more gigantic shields you get, the more self-healing you can do, the more you stay alive. Mark for Blood, however, or Mark of Blood, is kind of like the poor Blood DK's version of... Oh gosh, what is it called? The ability that Prot used to have, Vigilance, there it is. Where it's a short form debuff you can put on a target that costs 30 runic power, 15-yard range, but whenever the marked of blood target hits an enemy, hits its enemy, so it hits your ally basically, the enemy's damaging auto attacks only, will also heal the victim for 2% of their max HP. So I'll walk over here to this guy, I'll mark him, he'll start smacking me. We'll see Mark of Blood will heal me for 42,000, 42,000, 42,000, because based on my max HP. Or the target it's actually hitting, right? Whatever it's hitting, you know, your off tank, your main tank, whatever. But the more max HP you have, or the more max HP that your off-tank has, think of like a Guardian Druid with 10 million HP, and you keeping up Mark for Blood all the time, they're going to heal for a ton. 2% of their max HP every auto attack a boss hits them with, and because Bear Druids don't really have a lot of like dodge mechanics anymore, they're just armor and HP, it's pretty powerful. And Tombstone is scary and weird, and I don't, So it's a 1 minute cooldown instant where you consume all your Bone Shield charges, and for each charge consumed, this currently does not work with Blood Tap right now though. I have submitted it as a possible bug, and it should work with Blood Tap, but it does not right now. You gain 3 runic power for each rune, or sorry, 3 runic power for each Bone Shield charge consumed, so 30 runic power in total, and 3% max HP per Bone Shield charge consumed, so 30% max HP for 8 seconds. Now, this does work with Anti-Magic Barrier, for the extra HP would stack with the extra HP from here as well for more HP to use during Vampiric Blood or something like that. I'm going to jump down here to Foul Bulwark, which is each charge of Bone Shield increases your maximum health by 3%. Foul Bulwark, however, does not work with Tombstone. So Foul Bulwark needs to have the Bone Shield charges active to give you the maximum health benefit. So you would gain, with 10 charges, you would gain 30% maximum health, which you see here right there. But if you Tombstone, you will lose because it eats the charges and then looks at your maximum health. So you can't gain more max HP from Foul Bulwark and then Tombstone for a 30% of your maximum health shield, because it removes the Bone Shield charges and then looks at your HP to then give you this max absorb shield. But you totally can Vampiric Blood for 45% max health and Anti-Magic Barrier for the additional 25% max health. You can do this, and then you can Tombstone for a 1.6 million shield with my current HP. So it's another oh crap button. Obviously, Foul Bulwark is a passive increase to your HP over time. It does have other potential benefits, right? Like it will help your Bloodworms out as you have Bone Shield charges up all the time. But like Anti-Magic Barrier, Tombstone, Vampiric Blood is a huge shield. And remember, you also get a huge shield after Vampiric Blood ends with the Hemo Shield, based on your Blood Plague ticks. Just tons of HP bonuses, self-healing, and shields. Which, absorb shielding can be really good and really bad in certain situations. Think of Guard for the Brewmaster Monk. But because Tombstone's on a 1 minute cooldown, Anti-Magic Barriers nonsense is on a 1 minute cooldown, Vampiric Blood Shield is on a 90-second cooldown, reduced by Red Thirst, of course, but it's still got a cooldown on it. It's not guard spam. So hopefully it won't be like incredibly bad later in the tier when everyone's like, oh, Blood DK, so don't damage because they have 90 bajillion shields. Rune Tap is also down here, which is a weaker version of the current one on live. 1 rune, 25-second recharge, no haste synergy, nothing else happens with this. It's just a 3-second, 25% DR. That's it. Has the same animation. If you need the other DRs, and because you have none, again, built-in baseline other than just the RNG passive of Bone Shield, you can take Rune Tap if you like, if you don't want the passive HP gain. And the other one here is Roll of the Necropolis, which I have to read this off my notes, because Roll of the Necropolis is amazing and is also being changed in the next build. So as this reads, it reduces all damage you take by 20% while your health is below 35%. That's not changing. However, any attack which would reduce you below 35% HP is also reduced by 20%. How this happens now is that if any attack would, like a 1 million attack that takes you from 40% to 25% HP, that whole 1 million damage attack would actually be reduced by 20%. In the new build, it will read, damage taken below 35% health is reduced by 20%. And then for attacks that cross the 35% threshold, only the amount below the 35% threshold will be reduced by 20%. So the example is that if you're at 40% HP and you get hit for 10% of your health, you'll end up at 31% health, with the 1% of your health absorbed by Will of the Necropolis in the combat log. So, because it only reduces the damage that goes beyond 35%. So if 5% of the entire attack hits you, but the other 5% that goes below 35 is then reduced. And that's what becomes the absorbed amount or the mitigated amount for Will of the Necropolis. It's just a passive, like, oh crap, I'm low HP moment, whereas Rune Tap is proactive and Fallow Bulwark is also proactive in a way. It's maintenance. But this is an interesting tier because it's a lot of power. On-demand DR is obviously very good. Progression, like, oh crap, I almost died, but Will of the Necropolis saved my life. Overall, the new version will effectively be 9% effective HP when you're below the 35% threshold. You kind of act like you have 9% more. And 9% more HP when you have like 5 million is still a lot of HP. Whereas Fallow Bulwark, you need to just keep up your Bone Shield charges to gain the max HP, which is also fine, right? I left Purgatory talented here because it's a weird one. I was told during testing that the devs do not understand how powerful, or they kind of undervalue how amazing Purgatory is, and that's why it's still here and can be kind of gamed. It's a double-edged sword. So, it's an unholy pact that prevents fatal damage. Instead, it absorbs incoming damage equal to, or incoming healing equal to the damage prevented. So if you had 1 million HP, and you were hit for 1.5 million, you have a 500,000 absorb shield. That has to be healed away in 3 seconds, or you then die. However, in the 3 seconds that you are in Purgatory, near death, any additional damage taken adds to the absorb shield. So if you're at the 500k absorb shield moment of Purgatory, and you get smacked for another million, it becomes a 1.5 million shield. But you're not dead. It can be countered by Holy Priest's crazy single target heal, a lay on hands. You could vamp blood consumption and probably live, because again, you have no death pact. So vamp blood consumption is your only way to like snap heal yourself back up to full life. Possibly. But it is a great, oh, oopsie doodle, or the boss just smacked my face, or your healers had to move for a moment. It can still save your life. It can still save a tank's life. That's totally fine. I'll skip Blood Mirror for now and go to Bone Storm. Everyone's waiting for Bone Storm. This is your breath-ish mechanic. Every Death Knight has a pseudo breath of Cindergosa mechanic, and for Blood, it's Bone Storm. For Unholy, it was Dark Arbiter, and for Frost, it's obviously Breath of Cindergosa. So this costs 10 to 100 runic power. There's no additional way you can put more into this. It is just 10, 20, 30, etc., up to 100 runic power on a 1 minute cooldown. The amount you spend determines the duration, up to 10 seconds, where a whirl of bone and gore batters nearby enemies every 1 second, dealing shadow damage, and every 1 second heals you for 1% of your maximum health for every time it deals damage. Every time. So Bone Storm is going to be kind of bad on single target fights, but if you're AoEing like 12 Scorpion Scorpions, then Bone Storm will do a ton of healing. Because every time it deals damage, it heals you. Every single time. So 3 hits of Bone Storm equals 3 heals. 3 hits, 3 heals, 3 hits, 3 heals. The graphic also looks fantastic, by the way. It looks great. But you're always going to want to cast it at high runic power. The problem, though, that I was told is that because it combats with utilizing Death Strike ever so often, but like it's a minute-long cooldown that lasts for 10 seconds, it only impacts Death Strike so often. You still need to make sure you're using it at high, if not maxed, runic power. Which also gives credence to like the Ossuary, Heartbreaker, Rapid Decomposition bonuses of having just more max runic power to help you with the rotation overall. to reduce the cost of Death Strike when you have Marrow charges up, right? The extra runic power generation while being in your Death and Decay, which you're going to keep down all the time anyway, and the extra runic power generation from Heart Strike, which you're going to spam anyway. Helps you get back to Bone Storm every minute or as fast as you can when you need it. Because it needs to be used at 100 runic power to get the best benefit of it. Blood Mirror. Blood Mirror says one thing and acts completely differently. I wrote down a bunch of stuff on this in the bug report. You can read all of it at your own leisure. But it reads a 2-minute cooldown that afflicts an enemy with Blood Mirror for 10 seconds. And while active, 20% of the damage dealt to you is redirected to the Blood Mirrored target. Wrong. Nope. So how this reads is it could be a death funnel. You Blood Mirror Scorpion. You grab 15 ads. You would take 20% less damage from each ad hitting you, and that 20% you reduce all goes right into Scorpion's face. That would be really powerful. That is not what this does. Blood Mirror is just Super Thorns. So it technically should read... what it does is reflected... Oh, it should say... Apply a magical Blood Mirror to yourself for 10 seconds, reflecting 20% of all damage dealt to you back to the attacking melee target while active. I tested this on dummies and crabs and Mushans and river beasts over in the other side. It does not work properly at all. If you Blood Mirror, I'm going to Blood Mirror the Raider's training dummy. In the combat log for the training dummy, if I stand next to him and he hits me, he'll reflect his own damage. But if I stand over here next to this little guy, he'll reflect his own damage back at himself. It just doesn't work properly at all. So we'll show it you real quick here. Blood Mirror on this guy is going to reflect himself. Reflect himself. I'll stand by this guy. He's going to reflect himself. And then reflect himself again. It doesn't work at all like it says it's supposed to. Which is just... Maybe the ability version is the one it's supposed to be now and the tooltip is broken or whatever, but it's very not what this says. It's just Super Thorns. It's a 20%. This is the closest thing you have to IBF because it's a 20% reduction in damage. So like I say here, the Raider dummy hit me and then it hit itself, or the Dungeoneer dummy hit me, it hit itself, even though I Blood Mirrored this guy. So, it doesn't just... It's good. It's a 20% damage reduction on a 2-minute cooldown for 10 seconds. Whereas Bone Storm is only damage and healing. And Purgatory is a oh crap button that has no... Never ever die during an encounter. So, it's good, but it's just wrongly worded. And that's the Blood Decay. It has a ton of shields, a ton of self-healing, and a lot of cooldowns if you want lots of cooldowns. The damage rotation is very, very smooth. There's like no downtime really depending on procs. You have great oh crap buttons. You have really cool animations. You say for the Horde if you're an orc apparently when you Death Strike, which is also very weird I think. But it looks pretty good. Thank you all so much for watching. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this second pass video. Check out the other second pass videos I have done by checking out my channel guide on my Twitch channel or in the video description box below. Again, the bug report is down there and all of the VOD is linked down there. It's like 7 hours long. Strap in. We go over a whole lot more stuff that we could have missed. And if you want to help support what I do here, the video description box has ways you can do that as well, like my Patreon page or buying yourself a shirt. There's an Arthas shirt. It's on my DBH. If you're a Death Knight, go get the Arthas shirt. Or don't. It's fine. I'll see you all in the next Legion video.